One, and we are live.
The Hunt for Success number 17 or 18. I can't remember, but we're back. We took about a 2-month hiatus to kind of do some tweaking, and we're back. Thanks for everybody who's given us feedback and kind of helped us stay motivated and give us some good feedback on how to improve the podcast. Today we got Joe Roeder from Red's Fly Shop. It's weird how YouTube can make an average person kind of a celebrity in some people's eyes.
An average person, yeah. I joke all the time. People, kids these days now want to be YouTube stars. It used to be like, I want to be a pro sports player. I want to be, et cetera, on TV. Now they're like, I want my own YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And guess what, kids? All you need is a cell phone and an internet connection. Those are the only prerequisites.
So I been fly fishing for about 10 to 15 years, somewhere in there. And I love going to Yakima and fishing the Yakima River, but
Stay on the mic there.
Your blog and your YouTube channel really impacted me from a fly fishing standpoint. I really started to learn how to fly fish from YouTube, which is another great thing. I mean, we live in a totally different world, right? Where if I grew up in the 70s, I want to have that access, and hopefully I know some good fly fishermen. But as I started watching your channel for a couple years, my reason for watching it changed. I became almost infatuated with your lifestyle and jealous. Here I am sitting in an office in my suit doing paperwork, and here's this guy. Sometimes I would call you names like, what a jerk. Your office is on the Yakima River. And even we were watching one of your videos before we started the podcast, before he got here, and I'm like, what a jerk. Look at him, with that background and being out on the river and fishing the best rods and getting to meet cool people. So I almost became jealous to a point. And we do that. We all do that, right? The grass is always greener, and you see other lifestyles. But I told you I don't have a list of questions, but I do have one question to kind of get us going here. Is what does success mean to you?
Yeah, it's obviously a multi-layered question, but success would be, measured in so many different ways. You have your family success, seeing your kids, prosper and be healthy and become, good citizens and good people and make good choices, and knowing that you're going to launch them in the right direction. You have business success, which I'm going to kind of speak more to in this podcast, but business success is one that's going to provide you stability and freedom. For me, I didn't sign up for this job to make $1 gazillion, but through hard work and some really good decisions and a lot of blessings along the way, I've been able to make a pretty good living doing exactly what I want to do, with the freedom to be able to take, do other ventures like hunting or family vacations and things like that, where I don't feel like I'm a slave to the job. So success for me is definitely that freedom and stability.
It sounds like you're right where you want to be in life, where you're living life in a very intentional way, where it's very easy to fall in and live life accidentally, right? Where you end up at a 9-to-5 job in a cubicle, and you are sitting there watching videos of other people living the life they want to. So what's it like being a guide out on the Yakima River? Because obviously we know lots of guides, and you get different stories of. I know guides that don't like their job, right?
Yeah, they shouldn't be guides. I mean, just number one, there's people who should be guides. They were born to be guides. I've been told I should be a guide. And I'm going to share a story with you. Okay, so
stories are good.
Yeah, I'm going to share a story with you because this is it was a divine intervention. That's the only way I can tell you this. So I started guiding when I was in college. And if you had told me when I was 16 or 17 years old, hey, you're going to be able to be a professional guide and outfitter, I would have thought my odds of being a professional basketball player at a generous 5'10" were equally as good as being a pro guide. And I would have thought, nah, you're crazy. So same happened in college. I got to college and loved fly fishing. It was just a nut.
And where'd you go to school at?
Central Washington University. Go Wildcats. Most people don't even know they're the Wildcats. But went to school at Central and ended up loving fly fishing, started to adapt to big Western River style fly fishing on the Yakima. Never thought I would be a guide. I got to know some guides and, was obviously envious of their job, because guides from a work hard, play hard standpoint, as a young person, say somebody who's 20 years old, you get to go row a boat for a guide trip that day, get a little tip at the end of the day. That's great money at that age. And I was really envious of the guides, but I never thought I would have that skill because I didn't grow up as a fly fisherman. My dad was not a fly fisherman. He's the furthest thing from fly fishing. We thought it was just a novelty people did to look cool. So I didn't grow up with any type of formal training or anything like that. Got to college, ran with it, just went crazy. Sleep in my car type passion for fly fishing. Well, never thought I'd be a guide. Couldn't afford my own boat. Boats would be about $5,000 just to kind of get started. Was a broke logger's kid. No way I was getting a boat. I barely even I drove a Suzuki Samurai at the time. A fake Jeep, counterfeit Jeep. So I didn't even have a car I could tow anything with, let alone a boat. Well, I went down to go fishing one evening at a park in Ellensburg and drove down there. There was about a half an hour daylight left. I was going to hit the Caddis Hatch, just fishing on foot by myself. There was an older guy and lady down there trying to take their boat out, their drift boat. And the current was incredibly swift right there. The river runs really high along that shoreline. And he was struggling to get this boat on the trailer. And part of me was afraid that they were going to lose the boat downstream. And part of me wanted to just go fishing and kind of ignore it. But I was like, they really need some help. Went down and helped him secure the boat, get it on the trailer so it didn't get swept away. His gal was there with him, and she, wasn't able to get in the current and help muscle the boat on the trailer because it was pretty sketchy. So I go down and help the guy, and naturally a conversation ensues, post aid, and so I'm feel kind of obligated to sit there and chat with this guy. But there was something really neat about the guy, so I missed all of my evening fishing helping this guy out. And the conversation comes around to like, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And I was like, well, I'm going to go fly fish at some lakes. And remind you, I've never guided. I've never done any I've barely even rowed a boat on the river. He says, well, hey, you want to go fishing with us tomorrow? And here I am looking at a guy and a lady in their 60s. I'm like 20 years old. I'm like, not really.
They just want me to row the boat for them.
They just want me to row the boat for them. And because I was asking him some questions, and I had a little bit more knowledge than he did, but wasn't super knowledgeable. And he goes, well, you want to go? And I'm like, how many 20-year-old kids in college are going to go fishing with a couple of old people he just met? But I'm like, I get to get in a boat and like float the river? I'm like, okay, I'm in. I'm that, really want to be floating the river and at least acting or pretending to be a guide. So I take him out on the river the next day. I say, okay, meet me at such and such at, a certain time, not a paid guide trip or anything like that. I just meet up with him, we're going fishing, and I just kind of assume role as guide and coordinator. And I'm telling you guys, the stars aligned fishing-wise that day. Every star in the galaxy aligned for us. We were catching fish on caddis dry flies. For those that aren't fly fishermen, it's like a very coveted form of catching fish. Very exciting, where you can see the fish, sipping bugs on the surface, much more like hunting with a fly. We were getting 2 and 3 fish on at a time in places that I have never seen fish feed since then. Never. It was crazy fishing that day. Never seen anything like it since, hardly. And partway through the day, he goes, Joe, really awkward timing, Joe, what's your last name? I'm reeling in a fish. I'm like, this kind of awkward. I go, Rotor. And he goes, keep fighting the fish. He's like, well, I see you take good care of stuff. You appear to be very responsible, and I realize I just met you. But, and by the way, he was on his way home to Sandpoint, Idaho with this boat from Portland. He was driving home, first float with the boat. First time he'd ever, this was the second. The first one is when I helped him get it out. Yeah. So he's on his way home with a brand new boat, not a scratch in it. And he says, well, how about I just leave you my boat so that you can pursue the idea of being a guide? Just basically gave me this boat on a non-conditional long-term loan.
And did you talk to him saying that I kind of have an ambition to be a guide, or did he just recognize that?
No, he just recognized it. And he's like, you just need to be a guide. And so so we go out fishing throughout the day, and part of me is like, forgive me for being skeptical, but I'm like, is this boat stolen or something? It's it's brand new. He just randomly goes fishing, and now he's giving me this boat. So it gets even worse. His extension of faith was incredible, because I lived in an apartment building, at Central. So he brings it to my apartment, puts it in the parking lot at the apartment mind you, I have a Suzuki Samurai. It's not towing anything. That thing would flip over backwards with the tongue weight on it. And he drops it in my apartment parking lot and even buys a chain so he can chain it to the light pole. And he extended that much trust to me with his boat. And so then at that point, I'm like, woohoo, I got to get a truck to tow this thing with. So I borrowed my dad's 76 Ford pickup, and Big Red. And so I got Big Red over to college with me, which had a top safe speed of about 45 miles an hour. It was our wood truck. And started running the river in this boat. It was, of all things, a North River drift boat. They don't make a lot of drift boats, but it was a North River drift boat, aluminum.
I've never seen one.
What did your parents say? Was your dad like, what do you mean somebody just left you a boat?
Yeah, they're really confused. They're like, yeah, he went to college. He's fallen off the deep end, it just sounded like an unbelievable story. My girlfriend, is now my wife at the time, was like, she's very cautious, and she's like, you really need to call like State Patrol or something. And I'm like, I called State Patrol, and State Patrol was like very confused on the whole story. Like, so he gave you this boat, just met him, and they're like, well, we have no record of any boat being stolen. So they're like, I'm good. I'm like,
so did your parents think you were wasting your time with all this fishing and taking a truck and going out in the river? And were they worried about how's this impacting your school? And
no, my parents did a lot of free range parenting for me. And I'll get into, as we go on, I'll talk about raising my own kids, because my own kids are at kind of the turning point nearing teenage years and such. But a lot of free range parenting, doing my own laundry, a lot of very distant remote parenting. No, they had really no input at all. They weren't report card parents. They looked at my report card. If I had, a low grade, it was like, hey, get it up. And I made honor roll, all through high school and college. I would say I was a capable student, but no input at all there. But as I went on, eventually I, my transition kind of worked like this was, so I was very passionate about guiding, and, met this person who dramatically impacted my life. I would call him, in the short term that I knew that man, I would call him a mentor, because his extension of faith changed my life. And if I could do that for other young people along the way and impact their lives with just really a small gesture, it didn't cost him anything. But from there, I went to forest firefighting. And so got into forest firefighting on a hell attack crew, got to fly around in a Huey, attack fires, fall trees. Grew up in a logging community, so I knew how to run a chainsaw pretty well. So I got a pretty good job on this hell attack crew, being, part-time, radio operator, part-time sawyer. Got to fall trees, got to do a lot of real good initial attack work. But at the end of my second summer from fighting fires, we had a really good fire season. And the end of August rolled around, and I bought my first fiberglass drift boat with a credit card and an overtime check. And that's where I catapulted into guiding as I went forward. It was really, it was a big jump.
You said something I want to touch on about having a mentor, and then realizing with your kids that you need to be that mentor for other people. Did you realize that at the time?
Oh gosh, no. No, when you're at that age, you don't I think a lot of young people are expectant. They expect this next generation to give them a hand up all the time. And it's not necessarily the case. There is no entitlement, So at the time, no, I was not cognizant of that. It was, it's all these years later, I realized what a huge impact that person had on me. And not only, just gifting me this boat, right? Because I had the boat for 6 months. And I almost saw that guy 3 times during 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't see him. It was not just the loan of the boat, but the fact that somebody would trust and believe in me and go, that's really cool that somebody, obviously cares that much about a person they've never met. And we have all sorts of opportunities in life like that when we encounter other people in situations that we can certainly do it. And it impacted my life, and it's still impacting my life because I'm attempting to do that at every given opportunity for young people now.
Because when it comes to hunting and fishing, I think that's one of the things I enjoy the most is the people that are older than me, a generation or two older than me, that have taken the time to take me out fishing or introduce me to hunting or pheasant hunting or how to train a bird dog. And as I'm getting older and have a kid, and those people are starting to pass and get older and aren't able to go do those things, I'm really realizing how important it is to pay that forward and get involved with youth and get your kids out and give back as much as you can. And it's weird not knowing that during the time, like in your 20s, And then as they start to get older and you start to get their wisdom a little bit and realize how special that was that they took the time to do that with you, and how it really is protecting what we all enjoy to do, but at the same time making us better people.
Yeah.
Right?
I do got another story about a mentor who had a big impact on me, and I didn't realize at the time. So we had the days of little gun shops are kind of over, unfortunately, with just firearms regulation and et cetera. It just seems, and some of this is speculation, and in no way am I going towards a gun control discussion on this, but it just seems like gun shops have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's a lot more remote processing of guns, and the internet's changed things. But when I was a kid, and same for you guys, there was a lot of little gun shops. You had the little local gunsmith, and he could fix stuff. He knew about old guns. He knew the history of certain models. And I went to this gun shop almost every day after school. When I didn't have sports practice, I'd walk up to Gil's gun shop. Gil was his name, Gil Hannawalt. And I would go in there all the time. And finally, I think he just maybe wanted to keep me busy because I would come in there and just pepper him with thousands of questions. And I'd get to meet all the hill folk that would come to the gun shop as well. So I got to be a fly on the wall in there a lot and listen to these old timers tell stories. And they probably loved bending my ear, and I loved listening to their stories. But Gil finally, I think, wanted to keep me busy, so he offered to. I had this 22, a Savage. I can't remember the model, but Savage bolt action 22 that was my great grandfather's, and just fantastic gun back when guns were extremely high quality steel. Yeah. Classic stocks, metal butt plates. I mean, just really high quality guns, and it was a ranch gun, and it had been trashed. And Gil offered to help me refinish the stock on it. So it took about a month, and he had me sand it down by hand every single day. I'd show up, and we'd do we'd start with 80 grit and work down to 600 grit, finally steel wool, and then finally just an emery cloth, eventually. And he goes, yeah, by the time you're done with that, it's going to shine, even though you haven't put a drop of oil on it. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, old man, you're crazy. And it took about a month, but he walked me through every single step of refinishing that stock, never charged me a dime, nothing. He was just like, hey, you're going to be here, put yourself to work refinishing your gun. And there's another kind of life-changing, I would say in reflection, life-changing deal where you learn how to work hard, you learn how to put some time in, you learn how to be patient, and you learn all those skills that, today we don't even have wood gun stocks hardly, but, so many kids are going to miss out on that unless somebody takes an exception to them, like he did with me. And again, that's just, I'm very fortunate to have had that.
Oh, that's a great story. I think that Ryan and I and a lot of people that hunt and fish have a lot of stories like that. And like I said, it's that mentorship, now that we're getting older, you really realize how important it was, and how important some of the nonprofit organizations are, like Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk, SCI, how important they are, and how far that money goes, not only on the land conservation, but on youth hunts and youth education. I was involved with Pheasants Forever for a number of years, our local chapter here, and we did a lot with habitat management and purchasing of land and making it public land. And but the part I enjoyed the most was our annual youth hunt. And you would see kids come in fresh out of hunter's education, barely can lift up their gun, or the kids that weren't able to hunt yet would come out and help us release the pheasants the morning of the hunt. Mm-hmm. And you watch them at 12, 13, 14 start to learn to hunt. And there was a lot of single parents or a lot of parents that weren't into hunting that would bring their kids. And that 4 or 5 year period from 14 to 18 goes by quick. Mm-hmm. And then you'll be out hunting and you'll see one of those kids show up at 18 years old with their truck, with their bird dog and a shotgun, and come out and go hunting for a few hours. And the direction that their life is going, because they were introduced to an organization like Pheasants Forever at such a young age, could be completely different than if they would have never had that opportunity.
No, absolutely.
And the amount of responsibility to see an 18-year-old in today's age get out of a truck with a bird dog and a shotgun.
Yep.
I mean, it's something that we're losing quickly.
Yeah, no, definitely letting kids handle firearms at a young age, and eliminating a lot of curiosity factors important. Guns aren't a big mystery. Kids know how to operate them, and it's not taboo to handle them. They don't got to do it in secret. I actually teach hunter's education. So I'm a certified hunter's education instructor. And I'm just, my business has gotten to the point where it doesn't run itself. It's got its challenges, but we've gotten to the point in our outfitting company and our business that, I've been at Reds. I can't remember how many years I've been a partner, but I've been at Reds about 12 years now. And one of our goals, it wasn't a spoken goal, but one of our goals has always been to be able to get our business to the point where it's stable, that we can start to do things like teach hunters education and a youth pheasant hunt with Pheasants Forever, which we did last year, actually. We did our first annual youth pheasant hunt.
Did you do it at your guys' preserve?
At our preserve, yeah, at the Mount Baldy Hunting Preserve. We had 33 kids, I think it was, actually come out on, most of them were coming out for their first pheasant hunt. And we partnered with them, and Pheasants Forever was a co-sponsor with it, worked with them, it was great. But part of the reason I got in hunter's ed in teaching it was, one, I want to give back. It's an opportunity for me to serve, I try to serve my community through my church in other ways, but I'll be honest with you, I like going down and visiting with old people. That's great. My heart isn't as passionate there as it is in doing something like teaching hunter's ed and working with kids. I have different talents, and I think God tries to get you to use your talents in very specific areas. For me, hunter's ed, I love teaching hunter's ed, and I think the students like it too. So I remember in my hunter's ed class, I had 2 instructors. I had Old Man Snyder, God bless him, but Old Man Snyder was not the most inspirational fella. But there was another guy named Jim Lane who was my teacher, and Jim wouldn't know me today, but I still remember him because he was younger, he was enthusiastic, and I still remember the class, and it was a traditional class, no internet involved, wasn't even a thing then. But I remember Old Man Snyder would just say, "You don't do this, you don't do that, you can't do this, oh, don't do that, that's just dumb," and the younger instructor was like, "Hey, you can do this, you can hunt here. When you learn these skills, and you master these regulations and these rules, then think about all the amazing stuff you can go do." And it was like a do and a don't, and I just remember him being really positive and really encouraging in that way, and that's part of what inspired me to become a hunter's ed instructor and start to get more involved in that, is being able to reach out to these youth and be able to go, hold up a book of regulations. And some people see it as a rule book, and I see it as an opportunity book. And all the things that you can learn and know inside that pamphlet, the more you know the rules, the more success you're going to have. In fact, post Super Bowl, Tom Brady, who knows the rule book better than anybody in the NFL? Probably Tom Brady, who complains the most, Tom Brady. But that works out to his advantage a lot in being an expert on the rules. And people always accuse him of being a complainer. And I'm like, I'll bet you half the time he's right.
Yeah.
But I think that knowing the rule book inside and out can give you some advantages in just knowing what seasons overlap and what opportunities are there, what units are there.
Absolutely.
Well, I not to interrupt you, but I really like that analogy, because Tom Brady also has an impact on the rules of the game, because the rules change every year, right? So because he's so knowledgeable on it and so vocal about it, I guarantee you has a big influence on the rules, just like the hunting pamphlet. Once you get to a certain age and you have so much experience, you realize that you can be an active on the political side and influence the regulations and the seasons and the limits and all of that.
If you know the rules, love or hate Tom Brady, but the kids can all relate to that because they know he's a complainer. But yeah, we teach hunter's ed there, and then the youth hunt we will do again. We haven't set the date, but it'll be sometime around the end of September, early October, and we're going to run back another youth hunt. Last year was it was amazing, and we have the resources at our resort, our lodge, and just the company that we are with the visibility that we have to be able to recruit good turnouts for like hunter's ed classes. We do a lot of free stuff. I will unabashedly campaign for this event we have coming up, the Reds Rendezvous 9, just since we're talking about outreach and such. 9th year in a row we're doing this. It's a free event to the public, lots of kids stuff, a big outreach towards women and getting the family. And women make up a much smaller component of the sporting population, and they probably always will. I just don't think women, if you have 100 women, out of 100, not as many women gravitate towards hunting and shooting as men. It's just a biological fact. But we want to invite all women to come and get schooled up, get learned, or learn the skills and the sport of both wing shooting and fly fishing, and give them every opportunity to get in it, because even if they don't stick with it and aren't as passionate as maybe their husband counterparts or boyfriend counterparts, brothers, dads, whatever, at least they're going to be able to participate. They're going to have the knowledge of it, and we're going to give them the opportunity to hand up to jump into something like wing shooting. And what we're seeing is a lot of women coming and taking our classes and events that their husband's not even involved, or maybe they're single and it's a girls' weekend or a girls' trip, and they're coming out and they're learning how to shoot and they're learning how to do stuff, especially with people's awareness on kind of sourcing your own meat and eating organically and eating clean and eating healthy. It seems like it's really piqued a lot of people's interest in what would it be like to source my own food and harvest my own food. So at that event, we're doing a women's cast and blast outreach that is enormous. I mean, I don't know of anything that's ever been done like it. It's 100% free. The women have to RSVP online. It's the weekend of April 20th through the 22nd, and they can sign up online for a particular time slot, and they're going to get ammunition included, shotgun included, professional instruction, and it's all girls. They don't get their dad or husband, peeking over their shoulder critiquing them. They just go and shoot with a pro. They're going to come back, walking the walk, talking the talk, and they are being warmly invited to start to participate in the sport of wing shooting, followed by fly casting lessons.
Yeah.
So, and then we do some kids stuff too. But the women outreach, really, if we can get mom there, it makes it a lot more accessible to start getting kids and some multi-generation participation in a lot of the things that we do.
I think
awesome.
that's excellent.
Where can they go to register online for that?
So if they go to redsflyshop.com and click on upcoming events.
All right, I'm just going to go to the screen capture here really quick. So here we are at Red's Fly Shop, and
upcoming events there at the top, just right of center.
Oops.
There you go. Yeah, let's look at this, and for anybody watching, we'll just show you how to RSVP, because this is going to be it's the 9th year in a row. It's really a great event. Go ahead and scroll down, and you'll see a little summary of the women's cast and blast combination lessons. You just scroll just right past it there, right there. And they can RSVP right there.
There we go.
Super easy, just takes a moment, but we need to know how many people are coming for each time slot. And that's a picture of our sporting clays course there. We have.
So do you have a lot of female instructors there too?
We don't. We do get guest female instructors from time to time, but no, our instructors are male. If we get women's shooting instructors, we'd love to be able to utilize them, but currently in our company, we don't have women's shooting instructors.
Perfect. All right.
Well, and I think that's really what separates Reds from a lot of the other outfitters. And you mentioned this yesterday in your demonstration at the Sportsman Show about how having more educated fishermen and providing that knowledge will end up in more business for Reds, right?
Secret business model, right? Teach you how to catch lots of big trout, and you're more likely to come back and buy some stuff.
Well, and it's a good separator, right? We apply that same theory in our business, where you slow down a little bit, take time to teach people about what they're doing, and you get more loyal. And the word that I think we use a lot is that trust. You build that trust with somebody, where if I'm planning a summer Eastern Washington, Central Washington fishing trip, I always go to Reds.
Mm-hmm.
One, it's an amazing lodge, and I want to hear that story. But two, it's the people you meet, the education, the guides. Even when I've gone out, I always bring my own boat, which I'm probably at where you were when you got that you got the loaner boat.
I'll tell you about my first float trip at some point here.
Well, you did a video on anchoring your boat. Mm-hmm. And my first trip on the Yakima was the first time I drifted a boat by myself. And this was before I watched your video. And your video was talking about the chain anchors. And I had a big pyramid anchor and put the boat in, dropped the anchor, got the anchor stuck behind a boulder. Didn't know what I was doing, was yanking on that thing, and immediately saw my boat start to, the back of the boat start to go under the water. And I just yelled, "Back to the front of the boat." And my friend ran to the front of the boat, and we're like, okay, first of all, let's get a knife out. I had a knot tied in the rope so that I didn't lose my anchor, which was stupid. So I was doing everything wrong, right? And then I get home, and it was like a week or two later, you did that video. And so
maybe I saw you almost sink your boat. Right?
And it's not a difficult river to float, and I'm already making big mistakes. But let's talk about the lodge a little bit, because the first time I found Reds, we had planned over 4th of July weekend a camping trip, my wife and I, before we had kids, on the Yakima. And then we drove by and I saw this little fly shop, and it was tiny, right?
Man, I wish I could find some photos of it to show people, you know, like, 'cause a lot of people don't realize what humble beginnings we had. Yeah, just a quick history of the Reds property. Formerly, at one point, it was known as the Lattice Inn. There's like a bar there, little place to eat. Kind of like, what's the place Nerva runs through it? Lolo's.
Yeah, Lola's Room.
Yeah, as some people say, it was kind of like that. You know, it was some pretty rough characters. But later on, it became known as the Riverview Campground. A lot of RV use, but real rustic. I mean, extremely rustic campground. Eventually, when I came to know it, it was ran by Red and Marlene Blankenship, and that was my whole history here is quite cosmic, because the first float I ever did on the Yakima River wasn't when I got the boat. That was, I'd been on the river maybe once before or twice before. I actually rented a raft at Red's far before I was ever even involved in guiding or anything else. It was like literally one of their old catarafts. It was like $90 a day. You had to make a big deposit on the anchor, because if you lost the anchor, Marlene was going to charge it. But very rustic. It was ran, the fly shop itself was on the porch of a 1965 single-wide mobile home trailer. So the fly shop itself was on a porch. The flies were locked behind plexiglass, and they would come and get a little key and unlock the plexiglass, slide it over. Tippet was in essentially a medicine cabinet on the wall, and you need some leader. They'd come unlock the medicine cabinet, fold it open, but it was all outdoors. And that was Red's Fly Shop. And as the years went on, I became a guide at another outfitter, and Red's continued to run. It was owned by Red and Marlene. Campground, shuttle service was basically just a taxi. You kind of let Marlene know where you're going. She'd come get you in the Subaru. They had some boat rentals, but really they were selling firewood and ice and running a campground. My current partner, Steve Joyce, stumbled upon it in like 2002, and later on, Steve really fell in love with it. And Steve has such a cool story. He doesn't get an opportunity to share it nearly as much as I would like, people to get to know kind of his history better. But he grew up in Billings, Montana. He moved out to Seattle, with his fiance. He was going to climb the corporate ladder, and went to work as a salesman, and I wouldn't say he hated it, but it wasn't really where his heart was. I mean, he was born to be an outfitter. I mean, Steve has such a heart for the outdoors and outfitting and helping people. He came across Reds. He started to guide a little bit from clients he'd known from his long guide history in Montana on the Yakima River, and came across Reds and started scratching his head, just going, this place is really special. Like, just the heart and the history and the location and the heritage of this place is really cool. And Steve started to, the wheels started turning, how that works. Mm-hmm. And really, a beautiful piece of property like that, people had been pursuing Marlene for years in an attempt to buy it. Lots of people wanted to buy it, build a couple of big trophy homes, make it a big equestrian park, a big resort, Ted Turner type ranch, if you will. She could have sold it to a bazillion different people. And she had a stack of business cards she showed him, this tall. And when Steve inquired about buying it, this is Steve's version. Maybe it's semi-inaccurate. Maybe the stack was this tall. I don't know. But she's, honey, get in line. Here's my stack of realtor cards this tall. So Steve got to know her, and coincidentally, Red had worked as a saddle maker in Choteau, Montana, which is where Steve's wife was from, and they had some neat connections. Steve and Red and Marlene, and they really got to know Steve and really developed a next level relationship with him. Because, if you've met Steve, you realize he's salt of the earth, and he's got a heart of gold, and they recognize that very quickly. Very different than anybody else had talked to him. And, quickly learned, Steve's, math major, very good with the calculator, and he's got some good mentors in his life, and he worked for some good outfitters. But, quickly put paper to pencil and realized that an outfitting company is never going to be able to buy a piece of property like that. It just doesn't work like that. So, he consulted with his uncle Tony, who is an orthopedic surgeon, but a very wise, well-educated business person, also from Montana. They chatted it out and said, without some type of real estate interest in this, there's no way we could ever finance this kind of property. It's just silly. It's a silly idea, unless we want to be bankrupt in 5 years. We need to involve some type of real estate interest. coincidentally, they bumped into another guy named Richard, who's just another I mean, the guys I work with and for, I could go on and on for hours about what good role models and great family guys and just great business people these folks are. We don't do anything short-term or short-sighted or halfway. I mean, it's always for the good of the, I would say business, environment, family, and success long-term. Richard, commercial real estate developer, and, avid bird hunter, avid fly fisherman, great dad, had all the great makings of good business partner. Those guys put their heads together and essentially built Canyon River Lodge, which now exists as a fractional ownership lodge. You can stay there by the night as far as just a nightly rental. But most people who want to spend several weeks a year out there fishing, bird hunting, vacationing, sightseeing, all that kind of stuff, they end up buying a share of one of the units there. And so that's the way they leverage some finances to be able to buy the property in order for us to get our fly shop business built. It was really important to Red and Marlene that they had a legacy of public use, meaning people need to be able to come to Reds and recreate, and maybe they just want to get advice on where to float and where to go and river raft with their family or bird watch or hike or just get a burger and a beer. It was important that there was a public service component to anybody that they sold this property to. And, through being able to develop the lodge and some cabin sites there, we were able to have Reds exist as a standalone public use business. And we're not making a killing there, but we're making, a healthy living. We're able to keep our bills paid and raise some kids, which is pretty exciting. So Reds is able to still service the public, great heritage there. We're doing things like teaching hunter's ed and kids and all sorts of great stuff that Red and Marlene, would and are very proud of. So that's the evolution of it, man. When I started there, we were operating in that mobile home, in 1965 mobile home. A lot of rodents had been in there. I remember being so excited when the shop, Steve, before I came to Reds, had moved the shop indoors, which was pretty sweet.
That's when I first went. I didn't go to the mobile home Reds.
You went to the tool shed.
I went to the tool shed.
Okay, let me tell you about the tool shed. So I remember we were inside that mobile home, and it was pretty gnarly, man. It was 1965, and it had been not kept up. I remember being so excited when we got new carpet. We put new carpet in that thing, and we thought we were like living in the Ritz.
It was like brand new.
Yeah, like a Berber high industrial garden. We bought it at Home Depot, and they glued that stuff down right over the old floor. I mean, it was like, and it was all cattywampus. There's a bunch of wrinkles in it and stuff because it was like a rough floor. Well, we operated out of the mobile home, and then I remember when we first started selling waders and thought we were big time. We're like, oh man, we got Dan Bailey waders. We're outfitting people with Temple fork rods and Dan Bailey waders, both fine products. But you kind of get what labels you can when you first start. And I remember being so excited about that. But then we had to move the mobile home when the lodge, development started. They were trying to build the lodge, and the mobile home was in the damn way. So they hooked up the mobile home and moved it. Well, it ripped all the skirting and the porch and everything else. And so we stacked some pallets up. So people were walking up pallets in our fly shop. Then we had no plumbing, so we had porta potty. That was it. We had no plumbing for years at Reds. Like, people think, oh, it's a fancy shop. I'm like, we spent many years without even indoor plumbing. Like, we are far from uptight, I'll put it that way. So we spent years with, bouncing around to different stores. But the tool shed was a dirt floor. When we moved into that, we had to move from the mobile home to the tool shed and remodel it, and it had a dirt floor. And I remember being pretty excited. We moved to the tool shed. Because we had indoor plumbing again temporarily, and then we had no indoor plumbing shortly after. But we did have a roof that leaked horribly, so we did have water coming in, but it was through the roof.
Rainwater, yeah.
Yeah, so we had a kind of tumultuous period of time prior to getting this new shop and restaurant built.
Oh, it's a beautiful lodge, and it's a great story. Kind of similar to a lot of people's success, right? And it wouldn't be so special if you didn't have that. The business didn't have that humble beginnings and that struggle to get taken off. So one thing I'm interested to learn a little bit more is you've really taken the guiding thing beyond just guiding, right? And your presence on YouTube and the education you've done, and the fly shop. When you go in there to buy a fly rod, it's a different experience, right? The amount of education I get just on gear when I go in there, whether it's one of the younger guides that is just enjoys talking about it, or some of the more seasoned guys that are in there. What's motivating you to take this beyond just guiding on the river and making it a much bigger business from the sense of online and the education and the YouTube channels, where a lot of guides aren't doing that?
Yeah, well, let's touch on YouTube real quick. You know, my YouTube channel's been far more successful than I've ever could have dreamed. I mean, so far beyond what I ever thought I would have done there, because my YouTube channel, anybody who knows it or has seen it realizes there's not a high production input to it. It's me with a camera or an Android phone or something spontaneously going, you know what, this is a good, useful bit of information. Let me document this, serve it up to the public, and if they like it, great, and hopefully they'll follow and keep watching. But I honestly don't have time to edit. The guiding is, I love the hard work, but it's hard work. You know, guiding and running a business and making money selling flies and rods and things it's a lot more challenging than it looks like on the outside. And I'll touch on all sorts of different business practice and leadership stuff if you'd like, that I think are applicable to any business that somebody's in. But the YouTube thing started with my transition from, I worked at another outfitter before I worked at Reds. And I got to the point where I was post-college, and I was really in that struggle of like, what am I going to do? You know, early life crisis, right? Like post-college, what am I going to do for a career? I had a degree in basic geography, and I graduated with 180 credits on the dot in 3 years and 2 quarters. Wow. So I finished college early, which is, you know, far outside the norm. And I just wanted to be finished. I was paying my own tuition at the time, and needed to get done. And I wish, in retrospect, at certain times, I'd wished I'd stayed and got a master's degree or bachelor of science. But for anybody listening who's in school that is going to get into the natural resource management field, you know, be aware that a bachelor of science or a master's degree is worth the investment, and just get that done while you're in school. Because a bachelor of arts, when it comes to any environmental consulting or habitat mitigation documentation, if you're going to write EPA environmental assessments or anything like that, or habitat conservation plans, you need that MS or that Bachelor of Science at a minimum. But I got done with college and worked for another outfitter and kind of worked through my tenure there. I kind of read the writing on the wall. I wasn't going to be a partner. I wasn't going to get bigger within that business, and I kind of had my first child at the time, and I was making about maybe $30,000 a year in guide wages, you know, not a lot of money, and newly married, had a kid, and took that leap of faith to go, you know what, I'm going to break out on my own, do my own business. And, you know, coincidentally, I had another, you know, friend who was about that same, you know, life point. You know, I can't remember if he finished school at the same time or not, but he didn't have any kids at the time, but he was like, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it independently. And so we ended up partnering up. It wasn't planned at the time we left the other outfitter, but we ended up partnering up for a year, and just, you know, as God would have it, we blew up. I mean, it was an amazing year. A lot of fly shops in the Puget Sound area got behind us. I'm still grateful to so many people who got behind us and gave us an incredible guide season, just fresh on our own as a new outfitting company. Did an extremely great job that first year, and we're gaining a lot of momentum in the market. And just through hard work, word of mouth, calling every contact that you had, meeting people at the grocery store, giving them a business card. I mean, cold calling people that you heard about liked fly fishing. I mean, I had a child at home at a very young age and a college degree that I had to pay off. My wife was still in school, so there was a lot of hustling happening, and really taught me a lot about, you know, trying to pick up every crumb. There's something to be said for just picking up every lead and every crumb that you have. Well, eventually I wound up at Reds. You know, Steve, my current managing partner there's other partners in Reds, but Steve and I, you know, are partners that work in the business every day. And Steve announced plans to build a lodge. It was a really good fit. So I went to work at Reds at that time. And at Reds, we were in a position where we had bills to pay. We had the future in mind, and we had to generate enough business to get this, you know, to be able to feed this lodge. And we wanted a new shop, and we had all these dreams. And at that time, YouTube was just getting started. And I remember we had this web developer who worked for us named Umit, UBG Designs. I haven't talked to Umit in a while, but I'm so grateful to Umit. And I love talking to Umit. And I remember Umit, one statement that he made, and I was trying to take over some of the web development stuff because I'd done some of that in college, and it's funny how the skills you pick up along the way. I worked in a computer lab in college, and some of the skills you pick up, just I would sit through and TA some of the classes. I was on staff there just to help troubleshoot stuff, and I'm not an IT guy, but I learned a lot about web development and a little bit of coding and stuff like that just in being around the lab. Well, so I'm trying to take over some of the web development stuff for Reds, and Umit did a great job, but I think Umit was 80 or $100 an hour at the time, and we really couldn't afford to pay Umit to do all the stuff that we wanted. And I remember Umit just telling me, video is the future. And this was in about 2006. And he says, video is the future. That's where everybody's going. And Umit helped me with the first couple of videos, but it really required, a lot of tedious things to try to embed video at that time. Was very complicated. Well, then YouTube came out, and they had that embed feature, and it became really easy for me to embed my own scripts now. And Umit had said that, and I never forgot it because I knew Umit's a literal genius, and very successful web designer. And he goes, "Video's the future." And I go, "Indeed it is, Umit. Let's do it." So at the time, we were really hungry at Reds, and I was one of the people that would put themselves out there. Sure, you get a little hate mail, and you get ridiculed if you have, God forbid, you have an opinion on something, right? Yep. But you get criticism and things like that. But a lot of the other guides that I worked with just weren't willing to put themselves out there, put themselves on video and things. Whereas like, hey, I've got a mortgage and kids, and I've got student loans to pay, and I'm hungry for this, and I want to see my business succeed to the point where I can secure my future in guiding. And that's really where I was at. It was an act of desperation.
And did you see that nobody else was doing it and see that as an opportunity?
Oh, absolutely. Because even our competitors, we have some great competitors. They keep us jumping out of bed in the morning. But the competitors didn't jump on it, partially because they just didn't want to put themselves out there and be subject to scrutiny. But when Umit told me video is the future, I picked up on, I said, indeed it is. Let's go for it. And I started to video document. If you go back to like 2007, I used to video almost every day of guiding, and I would go home and edit it till 10 o'clock at night, miss dinner, wasn't playing with my babies probably the way I should have been, because I was very driven to make this business succeed. The payoff now is great freedom and flexibility, and I have I've since built processes and systems to make everything function much more efficiently. But getting that jump start in video and being one of the first people to really get after that, the momentum really began to build, and we started to get a lot more attention. People began to trust us, and earning people's trust is huge, because anybody nowadays can get 15 good stock photos. Like, let's just say we could even talk, we're in the most beautiful taxidermy museum that I've been in, I think. Say I want to start a hunting outfitting company, and I've got all my permits. I could go buy 24 stock images from Getty Images of different animals, and I could go put up a website. I could write some fancy text, and I could look like a legitimate hunting outfitter on the web tomorrow.
Yeah.
I could make a business that looks so great, yet I've never guided in the Yukon one day. And that could be true for loans.
For no money.
For virtually no money. You get a Squarespace account or something like that. You could say the same thing for cars, loans, tech, optics, whatever you decide you want to sell, whatever services, consulting. But earning people's trust nowadays on the internet, we have Google reviews, we have Yelp, we have that kind of stuff, which helps people filter. But when you hear it from the word of somebody's mouth and you go, I can trust that guy. He might not be perfect, but he's trustworthy. That's really what I would hope that people would get out of the YouTube stuff that I do, is that, we're not perfect. Do our best. Pretty close. But they can trust us to help them make good purchasing decisions, be it planning a trip to some faraway place in the world, buying fly rods or flies or whatever, that they can trust Reds.
Yeah, I think that's great. And more and more people are starting to do that, but what a great way to separate yourself from everybody else and gain that trust and become recognized. I was walking around the Sportsman. You and I have never met before. We were walking around the Sportsman show yesterday, and I heard you doing your demonstration. I'm like, that sounds like that guy Joe from the Reds videos. And I walk over, and sure enough, it was you. So just being able to be recognized in a room full of 5,000 people, right?
Yeah, I just absolutely love what I do. But we take that approach. Our business philosophies are really simple. I think it says it on our website, and it sounds kind of corny. They're old-fashioned. Take care of the customer, take care of the fish. Everything else is going to take care of itself. You know, obviously there's lots of different strategies and nuances, but you take care of the customer and you're going to do just fine. And everything we do, we try to do is very customer-oriented, you know, in any media that we do with things.
Well, it's very motivating. And go back to what I started saying, where I watch you, or people watch other people in different industries and are jealous of what they do. And everyone wants to go follow their passion. But passion without that drive and hard work is not going to get you to that level of success that you want. And so just hearing your story about how you decided you wanted a guide and the decisions you made and the effort you put in, I mean, and to see where you're at now is awesome.
Man, I'll tell you, buying that boat, my first drift boat was a Hyde fiberglass drift boat, and bought it used. And because the aluminum boat I had really wasn't guide ready, it just didn't fit the profile of what I needed to have for paying customers. And I bought my first drift boat literally with a credit card and an overtime check. I mean, I killed it this fire season, and you know, like it was in August, I think, and I got this huge overtime check, and I was like, you know, I got this Discover card. It'll take like $2,500, and ended up buying that drift boat. And I'm certainly not encouraging anybody to go buy, you know, invest with a credit card to go, but I was determined to make that happen, and I knew that, you know, as soon as I did, and I was, you know, river ready, that that outfitters would start hiring me for my services.
Did you feel like you were taking risks at the time?
Yeah, definitely. I was scary. Yeah, I mean, I was laying awake at night, figuring out how I'm going to keep my bills paid, and, you know, I left firefighting to jump into guiding. Like, literally, it was a 1-week transition. I mean, I talked to an outfitter, and he said, yeah, I can start using you. And he's like, no, and it was no guarantees. I mean, that's in guiding and outfitting, there are no guarantees. And we'll talk about mentoring younger people. I'm fortunate enough to hire a lot of young men in their early 20s. And, you know, there's some philosophies that I try to impart on them, and hopefully they absorb some of those. But there's no guarantees in guiding, and I had no guarantees. But then I talked to my fire boss, and I was like, we got a big, you know, weather cooled off, got a couple of rainstorms. We had a pretty big crew, and I said, hey, any hard feelings if, you know, I try to get out of here next week it was back end of the season? He's like, absolutely not. He's like, you need to go do that. He's like, we're covered, and it'll get, you know, other guys some more hours and stuff. So, but it was, yeah, I had no real guarantees of any trips or business or anything like that, but I just took the plunge and, you know, wind up getting fed guide trips because I was a yes guy. And, you know, just back to when I was mentioning, one of the things I enjoy most about my job right now is being able to hire, you know, we hire women too, but predominantly people who come apply for us. I mean, out of 10 applications, 9 out of 10 are men. But these young guys that I get to hire, you know, if there's some things I can impart upon them is being a yes guy, you know, always being willing to do any job that you're asked to do, being a yes guy without rolling your eyes, without sighing, you know, all those types of body language. Those are things that absolutely drive me nuts as a supervisor, mentor, and, you know, owner of the business. Is you can visibly see in people's faces and attitude whether they're truly, their heart's in it and they're a yes guy. I don't know if you guys listen to the Jocko podcast at all.
We do.
Yeah,
we love Jocko.
Jocko has a statement in there, or there's a story, and I have no idea what episode it is, but this is one thing that stuck with me. And he says what was good in the military for him is, all I've got to do is just what I'm told, and that's it. And he's like, and I can be successful. And there's some real strength and truth to that. But I like it when I see those guys that are like, oh yeah, I'll take that. All I got to do is take out the trash. All I got to do is pick up that cardboard or pick that boat up out of the river, or you know, do whatever it is to do. We want to see yes guys, you know, willing to make sacrifice, work on their days off, work overtime, not complain when their hours get cut short. You know, if we don't want to, you know, we would never want to cut anybody's hours, but if we're cutting somebody's hours temporarily, it's because there's no business. I mean, that's a very tough position as a business owner to be in. But we want to see yes guys. We want to see people with that can-do attitude, and people who not only are just there for whatever, to get whatever they can out of the day, and that maybe as a paycheck for just some, but taking every single thing you can get out of that job and taking it with you is something I would encourage everybody to do. I look at some of the jobs I've had with firefighting and the militant and structural organization of process and protocol. You know, some of the things I learned there and how we can apply that to a business that we have today with a tremendous number of moving parts, be it guiding and classes and raft rentals and shooting and, you know, worldwide outfitting, not to mention our huge retail business. I mean, our e-commerce business is the biggest thing that we do. But process and protocol is incredibly important. And the computer lab job that I had and learning just tidbits about web development, enough to just be successful. And as a small business owner, you need to be able to have a broad variety of skills and take care of some of that web development on your own. I worked as a fisheries biologist, for one off season. And, that was when I was newly married. I was a contractor guide at the time. Actually, I was running my own outfitting company. So basically from, November through March, I was very slow on business. And I went and worked as a fisheries biologist, assistant to the fisheries biologist, let's say. I'm a Dwight Schrute.
Assistant to the regional manager.
Yeah. If there's any Office fans out there, they'll know what I'm talking about. So, but I did that, and that was very educational. I took a lot of that back with me and has enriched my outfitting. And I worked as a land surveyor for one off season, which was exactly within my wheelhouse of what I studied. I was a cartographer by education, and environmental consulting and land use planning was something that, I envisioned myself being in. And then I went and worked as a land surveyor. But when spring rolled around, it was time to go guiding again. But all of those jobs, I would show up to work with those with the intent that I'm going to earn my paycheck, but I'm going to learn every single thing I can, because it doesn't cost me anything to do my absolute best every time I show up and take every bit of that knowledge with me. And did I feel underpaid at times at those jobs? Of course I did, because I was putting everything I had into it. But I agreed to work for a certain wage. I showed up. I have a great attitude about whatever it is you're getting out of it, and take every single thing you can with you as far as knowledge, and you're going to be better off for it in the long run.
I love that, and I want to go back and kind of apply that a little bit to your staff at Reds, because a lot of people don't fly fish that are probably listening, but it's a very intimidating activity to get into. And I've been to lots of fly shops, and the attitudes really make the difference, right? Where you walk in, and if you're new to fly fishing, just the vocabulary and knowing what the equipment is and how to use it, you can make somebody feel stupid really easy if you are working at a fly shop, right? And you get in there, get into some of these fly shops, and it was almost like they didn't want to take the time, and they talked over your head, and they made you feel stupid. But every time I'd go into Reds, the amount of time they would take and slow down and not make me feel like an idiot, and recognize that let's welcome this guy in and give him knowledge, not just sell him something, but explain what it is and how it works and what the different flexes is, and take the time to actually help somebody, and then grab a couple fly rods and go outside and actually cast them. Mm-hmm. And I'm always looking at things from a personal development standpoint, because I'm always trying to get better. And there's been times where I've walked out of Reds, and other shops too, but where I walk out of Reds going, man, that's the attitude I need to have with my clients, right? Because, Ryan and I do mortgages, which is equally as complicated as fly fishing. And so slowing down and making people not feel like an idiot and welcoming them into the hobby is something that I've always walked out of Reds feeling, and then wanted to apply that to my business. So not trying to plug Reds, but.
Yeah, I have kind of and we don't have the time to have like regular sales trainings. I mean, we operate on a shoestring budget. Getting our staff together is expensive, because we have a big team, and trying to get it. We run really long hours, by the way. We run 7 days a week, and Thursday to Sunday, we're open till 8 or 9 p.m., and we open early. So we have a huge staff based on the number of hours that we have to man the shop, and we do rafting and valet service, for shuttle service. I call it valet service because it's easy to understand. We're moving a car for you. But getting the staff together for like a formal sales training is tough. But we try to operate basically on inquire, inspire, prescribe type formula, to where do you plan to fish? I mean, we don't care if you're fishing bluegills at your Uncle Jethro's pond. We just want to know where you fish and what you're actually up to. And if you don't fish, I think the words we actually use is, where do you plan to fish? In case somebody doesn't fish at all. I mean, if you say, where do you fish? They're like, well, I don't even fish. Yeah. Yeah. Well, wah, wah, wah. But where do you plan to fish? Where do you dream about, and where do you see yourself using your equipment? Maybe it's just flies, or maybe it's leader, or whatever. And then, they'll tell us, and then we want to inspire them. Hey, that sounds great. We'd love to support that. That sounds like a great goal or great mission, or man, that sounds like fun. Tell me more about it. And we try to have an inspiring, conversation with them. Let's talk, let's dream a little bit. That's okay. It's allowed. And then essentially we're going to prescribe, everything they need and nothing they don't at that point. Our job is to be an outfitter, and we're not doing the customers any favors if we underdo it. We need to make sure that they're prepared to have a positive experience, especially if somebody drives a really unique and remote location. And chances are if somebody came all the way to Reds, they're probably looking to get outfitted to some degree or equipped. And so the last thing we do is just try to prescribe, what they need and nothing they don't. But I have witnessed this in many other, and I look at things like when I audit what we're doing in our business, I go look at things like bicycle tours and scuba gear and ski gear and things in tennis and golf and other outdoor sports, and how that they're marketing and giving a message. So I try to look outside of fly fishing. It seems like in fly fishing, we start talking immediately about like specific models and specific products, and we skip way past like the big picture as to where are you going to go? How often do you think you're going to use this? Those are the most important questions involved in any equipment or activity prescription. We need to know a little bit about the person. And when I look at those other industries and try to audit it, a lot of times that's their message, is they're trying to meet people wherever they're at. And in fly fishing, I think that gets somewhat bypassed. We're just trying to sell you whatever the newest model rod is.
And there's some people in the fly fishing community that don't like new fly fishermen, right? Don't like newbies, and they're invading on their hobby and their locations. So, and I never have felt that way at Reds.
Those are the bad guys.
Yeah. Let's talk about. I know this. You shouldn't do this on the podcast, but I'm going to show you a video. And I'm going to have you critique a cast.
Okay, sure.
You want to do that?
Yeah.
And I really want you to critique me on this cast. Let me see if I can find it. Because this is probably the most...
Ryan, you're going to have to strap him to the chair.
So far, this has been
I think this is going to be your daughter.
Spoiler alert.
That's just a wild guess.
This has been the most fun I've had fly fishing, and it was in my driveway with an Orvis practice rod and my 5.5-year-old daughter.
I knew it.
And I should have had this queued up so the listeners can watch this, but I'll let you press play. So this is her first time casting a fly rod, and I just gave her the rod and started doing little corrections, but I'm so nervous I'm so nervous that I'm going to give her bad habits at 5.5 years old that she's going to be mad at me when she's 18. Yeah. Because she can't get out of these bad habits with her cast.
So here's what you got to do with her. And I want you to take that. You got that same rod. Practice rod's great. And you need to have her lay it down and not cast in the air like this. Okay. No false casting. Have her lay it down in front of her, and then have her lay it down behind her on the ground. And make her, because what happens like in her cast is you can see the line's not tight. It's only tight like at the end of the forward cast, but when she goes back, there's a tremendous amount of slack. And there's only like 3 truths in fly casting. Maybe there's 4. One is we can't function with any slack. The rod doesn't function whatsoever because line can only be pulled to speed, and we can't pull it if it's slack. Okay, so no slack in the cast. Fly rods hate slack. That's a truth. The other one is the fly is always going to parallel the path of the rod tip. And so wherever the rod tip goes, the fly is going to go. And
you really hounded on that yesterday, too, in your demonstration.
Yeah.
Like, you said that over and over. Like, your fly doesn't care. It's going to
care.
go wherever your rod tip is going.
Exactly. And we can't argue. The professionals couldn't argue about that. I mean, that's just like a truth and a fact and a constant. And so, like, with her, I would just have her lay it on the ground behind her and look at it and go, yeah, it's tight. And then it's going to force her, if there is slack in it, she's intuitively going to start slow and then accelerate. So she's going to draw the slack out slowly and then accelerate to get it to speed. And people don't intuitively do that when it's in the air because everything is happening in, microseconds. But if she just lays it on the ground and sees that it's a little slack, she can start slow, draw it tight, and then build momentum. And we have to build momentum. When we forward stroke or backstroke, there has to be a buildup of momentum.
So the way you're gesturing, would you suggest having her stand sideways?
Yes.
And cast side to side?
Yep.
Instead of,
Yeah, sidearm is, the only bad thing, like when I critique casting, The only risk of sidearm is that people begin to move in a very the rod tip moves in a very radial motion, and that's a very bad thing. The rod tip should actually travel on a perfectly straight track back and forth. And when people cast from the side, they tend to go in a very radial motion, and that fly begins to parallel that radial motion and becomes very uncontrollable. We want to think about the cast in terms of much more like an arrow or a laser shot. You know, it's very straight, it's very level, and it doesn't cast high in the air or way out to my side. Generally, when they go sidearm, they do that, but when people lay it on the ground, they can actually see where their back cast is. And just have her lay it on the ground and lay it forward. The other thing that you gotta do is think about tenkara fishing. I am totally into that on small streams. I'm a big fan of that. I think it's a very intuitive way to cast. People's control and just the intuitive nature of a cast. And to explain to anybody who's listening, tenkara is basically you just have line tethered to the end of a fiber, or not fiberglass, but a carbon rod, carbon, graphite, whatever you want to say. But you have line tethered to the end of that rod, and you can have a short piece or a long piece. But I fish a lot of small creeks with it, and I will tell you, I'm going to go ahead and brag up a little bit here for just a second. I got an 11-year-old son that is a fishing fool. That kid's line control, and I haven't pushed him. I haven't, egged him on or anything, but I could write an entire book about the process I'm taking my kids through with fishing because I am so stoked about where they're at. They're fishing. I don't push them. I let them ask to go. I started them with bluegills and bait. Okay, so this is the recipe for you dads or moms out there. So we have a little pond in Ellensburg called Mattoon for anybody who lives around there. It's close to the grocery store. So kids want to go fishing, dad want to go fishing, dad want to go fishing, dad want to go fishing. And I'm like, I fished all day, or I talked about fishing all day. I don't really want to go fishing. So what I do is, because I'm kind of burnt out, and I'm like, okay, if you guys get all your stuff, throw it in the pickup. I got to run to Fred Meyer anyway. I'll take you fishing, but you guys got to get all your own gear. So they put all their own gear in the truck, self-responsibility, preparation, planning. They get all their stuff organized. They go get a couple worms, if they're going to use bait or whatever. I'm not uptight. They can use bait or worms, whatever gets them fired up. And then we go down there, and I will help them just a little bit. But then I'll sit, and I'll return a couple of emails. I'll knock some work stuff out of the way that I need to. I'm not ignoring them. I'm giving them a leash. And then they get to make all their own decisions about where they fish in the lake. They just stalk the shore or the dock that's out there, and then they start to go, oh, if I go a little deeper, I get more bites. And these bluegill are great. So my boys have they have a whole tournament scoring breakdown, like a trout is 4, bass is 3, bluegills 2, or bluegills 1, crappies 2. And I'll take them there for 10 or 15 minutes, just max dose. Like, boom, they get there, they fish their brains out for 10, 15 minutes, throw the stuff back in the car and drive home. And I would challenge most everybody. They probably have a lake like that fishes like that June through August within minutes of their house. I mean, within 20, 30 minutes of their house. I mean, there's no excuse not to get kids doing that. And then we fly cast some, and we fish almost exclusively small creeks that have good small trout populations that are very aggressive. So that when my kids do fly fish, we have some near guaranteed success. But we also fly fish for bluegills a lot. And I try to get my kids, I started them with some traditional rods, like little tiny 3 and 2 weights. I was throwing one of them in those seminars yesterday. I'll throw one of them, a little Reddington butter stick, a little yellow fiberglass rod. I started my kids with those, and they constantly go to the reel. They constantly want to pull line. They constantly want to get the reel involved when it doesn't need to be involved. Most fly fishing is done with a pretty static length of line, and that tenkara is so intuitive with the roll cast because they can see that if they want slack out of it, they can't pull, which is very distracting. They just draw the rod up, pull it tight, and then they can roll cast. They can cast, overhead, very natural. And my kids with that tenkara stuff have really began to excel. I took them to Yellowstone this last year, and nice. We fished the Gibbon River in the park, which if there's any families listening, that was like the best trip that we possibly could have had. We fished the Madison some, but I took him to the Gibbon this year, man. My 11-year-old son and I just crush fish on the Gibbon. I mean, and independent, man. The kid's a shore stalker. He can cast, he can fish, he can read water. And a lot of it has to do with that, sticking with bluegill, not forcing fly fishing on him, and getting him in that tenkara game. Now, you can rig up tenkara on a standard rod, but the best one I've found, if people are really, and I use the rod myself. I mean, it's not just for my kids, but that Temple Fork Cutthroat tenkara rod is the shortest, littlest, lightest tenkara rod I've found. if there's a better one out there, put it in the comments on this podcast, and I'd love to know about it. But it's 8'6", and it acts like a 2 or 3 weight, which 8'6" is still pretty long. But go research it on the Reds YouTube channel. They break down this small, so I ride horses too, and I can trail ride and tie it to the back of my cantle, and we can ride horses in the mountains, and I can get my Tenkara rod out and fish. I can trail. I've a lot of trail riding. I've trail ran with it. I've hiked with it, and it breaks down tiny. It actually telescopes down, and it rigs up in a matter of seconds, and I don't have to have the bulk of a reel. I got a little spool of tippet and a few flies, and I can be like kind of Bear Grylls fly fishing guy.
Yeah.
You can go feed yourself if you had to, but it's somewhat similar to those practice rods, but live action. And the way kids land them is really natural too. They don't worry about the reel or stripping line, which is very distracting. There's nothing worse. I've seen this. I've done it. It's ugly. Is a dad hollering at their kid when the kids finally got the fish on a fly, and the kid's having this like amazing moment, the best moment of their life, and their dad's like, no, don't reel strip, or you're reeling backwards. And it's like there's a lot of utter confusion, whereas the Tenkara, boom, they just pin that fish, and then they just reach out, grab the line, and haul that little trout in, or that bluegill, or whatever it is. I can't say enough about my kid's progression in his casting. I mean, my 11-year-old's double hauling. He's casting great, and I think a lot of it, and I have not spent a lot of time with him. I've given him just these real conservative doses of it because I don't want to ruin him on it. I dream of us, he may be running red someday, so I don't want to ruin him on it, and I've been really careful, but that Tenkara is where I've by far seen the most progress.
What about using a Tenkara on a lake?
Tenkara on lakes I'm not as big a fan of, but they do work. Like if I were going into a high mountain lake scenario, I love, maybe it's another podcast, but I'm an absolutely avid backcountry bivouac hunter. I hunt with my sleeping bag on my back and do lots of roaming around. And there's a lot of high lakes. And if I were going to start to incorporate Tenkara into some of my backcountry stuff, all you need to do is get a longer line, and so that you can get out a little bit further. And the fight on it, you're just going to hook the fish like normal. You just reach out and grab the line and kind of feather them in, like hand line it.
And nymphs, all that kind of stuff with the Tenkara would be appropriate?
Yeah, Tenkara actually started, it's interesting, and I think it's going to come back around because people really are pursuing, it seems like to me, like purity right now. Like people are kind of like in that, I want less stuff, I want better stuff, I want more useful stuff. And among millennials, camping and outdoors, the pursuit of outdoors is at an all-time high, according to some trade study I read the other day. But that simplicity of being able to just have a rod and go camping and go to a lake, and Tenkara started actually as a commercial fishing application because they wanted to be able to catch a lot of fish and do it fast. They didn't need to reel, they didn't need it complicated. It was in the mountains of Japan, they need to be able to catch a lot of fish fast. And it's an extremely simple process, but it was all done with wet flies typically. And dry fly fishing is something we've kind of added to it naturally because we want to catch fish on dry flies. But nymph fishing with a Tenkara, and I've got a video of me doing that and swinging nymphs because it's a long lost art actually, and it's really fun. If you were to read fly fishing from, say, the early part of the early half of the century, say 1950s, 60s on forward. Wet fly fishing, traditional wet fly fishing, where a fly fisherman's going to cast into the stream or the brook, as it's often called in like an old outdoor life, and they would let that fly swing on tension and actually track across the river, and you would get to feel the bite, which is really exciting. I grew up fishing a lot of spinners in rivers around the Mount Rainier area where I grew up, and having a trout whack a lure is really exciting. I mean, that tug is the drug. And when you switch to fly fishing, you do definitely miss some of that with the exception of some streamer fishing. But having a fish pick up a swung nymph, a nymph is a little aquatic insect, just for folks who aren't totally speaking fly. But you actually get to feel them bite, and it's really exciting. And Tenkara is very good for that, where you actually stalk downstream and you take and you roll and cast that fly across. Your fly sinks, and then it swims and drifts across river. The trout sees that fly swimming across and picks it up on tension, and you get an absolute direct connection with that fish. You feel all of its energy, life, and power, and really its spirit, like all in one tug, and it's a direct connection with no slack or no slop in the reel. And so it's like, bam, I mean, you feel the thing bite, and it's really addictive. You know, as you get into like Tenkara, you'll see that there are some people like, it's the only way to fish. It's so pure, you know, and I'm definitely not one of those, but I really think it has an extremely practical application for, you know, beginners, kids, small stream, backcountry enthusiasts. It's just such a pure way to fish. And again, the only one I've found is that Temple Fork Cutthroat is the only model I found that's really light enough to do what I like. But you can fish nymphs with that. In lakes, what a lot of guys are doing is they're going to roll that out on a longer line, maybe with a sinking fly. And you can just use old pieces of regular 5-weight line. Those rods aren't real picky about what you use. That's the beauty of it, is your fly line's just a chunk of recycled line. Yeah. Come into Reds, I'll give you a bunch of it. But they'll take and they'll actually lay the Tenkara rod out, and then they just draw their rod up slowly, up, and that swims the fly in. And if it bites and they have leverage here, they'll set the hook. If not, they just grab the line and haul the fish in really quickly as the fish is hooked.
So I love the idea for my 5-year-old. So I'll get one of those. Where we fish a lot, just because it's local, is Lake Merrill on Mount St. Helens.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Which is a high mountain lake, and the reason I love it is they have during the summer they'll have a Hexagenia nighthatch, and for those who don't know, that fly's about the size of a silver dollar and bright yellow.
It's a whopper, man.
Yeah, well, it's so much fun. And depending on the hatch, I mean, there could be thousands of flies in the air, and the bats are coming down, eating them, and the birds are flying all over, and fish are jumping everywhere. And then you'll hear, if it's in the fall, you'll hear an elk rip off a bugle in the background. It's just a really cool time of summer or late summer in the evening. And you fish all the way through dark. And it's a 45-minute drive from our house, and it's beautiful. You're up on Mount St. Helens. So that's where we'll be spending most of my time with my daughter this summer fishing. And she's been up there a few times. I mean, she was up there with one of those pink Barbie rods at 2 years old and catching fish. So.
Yeah, I would say let her throw the Tenkara rod. I mean, it is, the growth you see in their casting is exponential.
Good. Well, we're going to spend 10, 15 minutes a couple times a week with that practice rod, and I'll get one of those Tenkara rods. But I'm really looking forward to this summer. And Ryan has a son that's a few years older, so it's cool seeing Ryan start to get in those things, hunting and fishing, the BB gun. And I got a girl, so I'm choosing fly fishing to get her into, or see if she likes it. And she loved casting that little practice rod. All right, so
and my parents, they have a couple acres with a spring-fed pond. And we have bluegill in there. My dad put, there's largemouth bass in there, and then my dad stocked it with some trout. And so we'll go out there, put a worm on, and we used to just almost every other cast, just bluegill. Yeah. And those little suckers just fight, and it's so fun for the kids.
Yeah, that is the best. It's funny because, like, I used to read, my dad was a log scaler is what he did. And so there was always, like, for those who don't know what a log scaler is, log trucks would often pull in, and my dad would, classify, grade, and measure the logs, basically assess value, and log truck pulls out. And so I'd go to work with him sometimes, and they always had these ancient outdoor life magazines, and he would bring them because they'd been sitting around the scale shack for 20 years. And I just remember, like, when I'd read those old outdoor lives, I remember a couple of real distinct things. Is panfish were cool for fly fishermen back then. Like, they were like a big part of what, guys did. Like, oh, here's techniques to catch more bluegill on flies, and you'd see little deer hair poppers and stuff. And, like, you don't see a lot of that anymore. I think our world has gotten so much smaller just with the connectivity of internet. So instead of actually reading something that would be feasible to go do that weekend, now we've got people reading these articles about going and catching golden dorado, which is really market driven, right? Like, outfitters like me, I'm guilty. Mm-hmm. Want to drive interest towards these expensive, far and remote places that require, a more expensive gear set and a bigger investment versus filling the pages with practical how-tos like, hey, let's catch some more bluegill, or a tip for how to fillet your bluegill better, because it's an awesome eating fish. I'll tell you about the bluegill beat down in just a second.
Okay.
Our annual family trip. But in outdoor life, the other thing is a well-rounded sportsman-owned bait caster, spinning rods, fly rods, shotguns, and a deer rifle. I mean, fly fishing wasn't this exclusive thing where it's like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a fly fisherman. Well, good for you. I fly fish too. I personally do everything. You go into my garage, man, I've got tree stands. I've got every sporting good you could imagine. I cross all sporting boundaries.
Well, and people judge so quickly. Like
Yeah.
I'll run into somebody and be talking to them and going, oh, hey, I'm going salmon fishing this weekend, and would you like to come? Or, oh, you're gear fishing? Oh, no, I strictly fly fish. I'm like, well, you're missing out on a lot because I like catching fish, right? Whether it's on gear or on a fly rod or whatever it is. Hand lining a tuna in out in the ocean without even using a rod. I mean, I just like catching fish, like you said, the drugs in the tug. But people get really bent out of shape, some people, where they're strictly gear fishermen. Or we were having this conversation up at Rogers yesterday, and guy's like, yeah, I don't fly fish. You know, I just gear fish. And I'm like, you're missing out on such good fishing opportunities.
You can learn a lot, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a pretty well-rounded sportsman. I do a little bit of everything, and I'm proud to be able to do it because I think my background of growing up, I fished almost exclusively extreme light tackle, finesse, largemouth bass. Like I owned ultralight spinning rods, and I would fish, dude, I could take a 4-inch squirming lizard, and I could catch unweighted, always, neutral buoyancy, and I could catch, great bass almost everywhere I went, and I think that background of growing up with a lot of bass fishing, light tackle bass fishing really plays into fly fishing. The two are actually extremely similar because they require so much touch and finesse. But I want to share the bluegill beatdown with you.
Yes.
So it was, I want to say, I can't remember if it started over Father's Day or Mother's Day, but it was somewhere between Mother's Day and Father's Day. We were sitting around and we're trying to figure out, we'd left, kind of Sunday kind of open, but I do remember it was a Sunday. So it was Mother's Day or Father's Day, and we didn't really make any grand plans. Usually for Mother's Day, we do a bunch of yard work. And usually for Father's Day, we go do something awesome, which my wife pointed out to me 2 years ago. I'm like, God, I guess we do. My women love the nest, man. You want to take care of the nest. You want to make them happy, take care of the yard, the house, and the property. But, we did church on Sunday morning. Unfortunately anymore, definition of success, flexibility takes Sundays off. Most Sundays I can get off. I think that's really important as you have kids and you get a little bit older. But we're kind of hemming and hawing, like, what are we going to do today? And we're like, kids are like, Dad, we want to go catch some bluegill, and we want to keep all of them. Like, that was their one request. And I'm like, because I usually don't let the kids keep that many fish just because I'm like, man, I feel like I'm in fish all the time, right? Like, I'm not that pumped to keep them. But so I'm like, okay, let's do it. So we went, and we went to a lake out in the Columbia Basin, and public lake, and nothing real special about it. I just know there's a lot of bluegill, and they happen to be schooled up at that time. But we just threw exclusively flies, dry flies, and man, we had 3 or 4 rods going. I threw the family of 5 is all in the boat, my skiff. I'm pretty sure I was over Coast Guard capacity for this thing, at least on body count. But we started catching bluegill. We kept 44 bluegill. We released the smaller ones. If they were smaller, I can't remember if it was like smaller than my hand or what the barrier was, but there was definitely a threshold it had to be above. But we kept 44, and we cleaned all of those bluegill that day, and we had it was the most fun that we'd had really doing much of anything outdoors. And my wife's catching these bluegill, and it was very meaningful because the kids are like, we need more of these things. Kids have an innate instinct to predate and harvest that's buried in all of our DNA, and you really see it come out in kids when it comes to fish because they hate letting them go. You could take the sweetest little girl that wouldn't hurt a hamster, a fly. She catches a fish. Can we keep it? First thing.
We got to eat it tonight. We have to eat this thing.
Yeah, they unbridled. I mean, kids have that buried in their DNA, hunt and harvest. So the kids are pretty stoked. My wife's catching bluegill, so we go home and we fillet all these bluegill. It was great. I got pretty good out of them by about number 40. And but bluegill are great eating fish. We just make some kind of fish and chip thing with them, but gluten free, of course. Makes it healthy. But so the bluegill beatdown is now a tradition of ours. So we go do the bluegill beatdown, catch a bunch of bluegill, do it all in one day. And it's amazing how much fun you can have just on those local warm water fisheries with kids. When you start keeping a few fish, especially smallmouth bass, the biologists that I know and work with have told me one thing regarding smallmouth bass. If you want better smallmouth bass fishing, bigger bass, keep smallmouth bass. Retain them. They reproduce and grow so fast that their size is thwarted by competition typically.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, smallmouth are great eating fish too, so you don't have to feel guilty about keeping those.
I know we're getting close on time here, but I just want to touch a little bit on some of the big trips that you guide. And because I'm just getting to the point in my career, my fishing career, where I'm looking at, okay, I want to get beyond Mount St. Helens. And we're going to Maupin in August. We're going to do a little fishing and catch a Pearl Jam concert while we're there. And then we're going to Patagonia to fish Jurassic Lake in November. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but tell me a little bit about your enjoyment there. Is that something different, gets you out of Yakima? And when did you decide to make that part of your business model?
Yeah, well, if you would have told me when I was a teenager or in college that I'd be getting on an airplane to go fly fishing, I would have thought you were crazy. So, yeah, that was totally outside my wheelhouse or even my perception of what I might be doing someday. But as I've gotten a little bit older, and I've been guiding for almost 20 years now, I think it's like 19th season coming up, you obviously I've gained a lot of knowledge and expertise, not just in sharing stories and experiences with guests and other outfitters that help get me educated on the fisheries of the world. I hear lots of perspectives, a lot of people who are satisfied with particular destinations. So you begin just to build some inherent knowledge without the travel, but you gain a real good grasp on what people enjoy about certain adventures. I mean, I've guided steelhead and bass and traveled the world and lots of trout fishing. God, I've been a lot of different places now, but no, I wouldn't have thought that would be part of what I do. But now it's really a natural fit because you have all these relationships with customers that trust you. They know you personally, and if they're going to write a significant check, jump on a plane, and travel to some faraway place in the world, they want some type of filter or ambassador to endorse it and travel with them. At Reds, we focus and specialize almost exclusively on hosted trips, where we put together a group, and if you're traveling as a single angler or just two anglers, we build a community around that trip. There's build up and there's newsletters and there's open houses to where people can, if they live in the Northwest, they can meet each other. But I'm kind of that adhesive glue that kind of binds this group together so people feel a little bit like they know each other. And also, I've done a lot of research. I've fortunately got the time and resources in my job to be able to execute a really good trip, picking the right tides, the right time of year, the right guides, reputable outfitters, checking references. And usually I know of a destination for a couple of years before I actually book it. I start to pay attention to a particular lodge. I have a bullshit filter for outfitters that is very acute. I can tell when another outfitter's BSing me, which is very valuable. And kind of back to the point of, any outfitter can go start, have a little website startup and make their business look incredible. It's those real word-of-mouth experiences and that longevity that really validates a particular destination or outfitter. So, our niche is really, earning people's trust, picking out a particular destination, setting aside what we feel is a good week. We try to do this really well in advance. Most of our trips are all planned well over a year out so that we get the right lodge and the right dates. And we essentially, our business relationship is a lodge in South America, for instance, or a lodge in Central America, or, Christmas Island, or Ascension Bay, Mexico, or Baja. Those lodges would have a tough time getting themselves to the expo center down here in Portland, right? Yeah. I mean, that's international travel for marketing. They're just not going to do it. You meeting them in person is very unlikely. So we're the liaison. We've been there. We know those folks. We communicate with them. We handle wire transfers and all that kind of stuff that people don't want to have to think about when they're planning, fly fishing adventure. So we act as the liaison. We get paid a small bit for our efforts because it is a lot of work coordinating a group of anywhere from 8 to 15 people to fill. We try to fill the entire lodge when we do these trips so that it's all Reds. And then we get to distribute guide assignments, which is really key because all lodges are going to have guides that are highly experienced to less experienced. It's just the nature of guiding.
You can match them up.
And we rotate so that, you don't show up at a lodge and some attorney from New Jersey is taking the best and most experienced guide the entire week. And you being new to that lodge, you're with the kid with no suntan, who's never been outside a day in his life, the new guy. So with Reds, we take the whole lodge so that we can balance and distribute that guide talent evenly throughout the week and make sure that everybody gets an opportunity at different species or different guides when they're there. And generally what we found with our experiences and contrasting them to, say, you know, a couple of guys that book as a 2-person group and they go to a lodge, and maybe they'll get great service, and I certainly hope they do. But when Reds brings a big group, this has been planned for a long time in advance. That lodge has secured, you know, to experienced guides. That lodge has secured all those resources they need for the Reds group that's showing up, because we're generally a pretty big customer at most of those lodges. And we don't plan to do things with lodges or resorts that we don't plan to be doing in 5 years. So when we engage in a relationship with a lodge, our outlook is this isn't just the one trip that we're doing, but we're going to plan to bring groups back again and again and again and again. And we work with well-seasoned lodges in order to build long-term relationships. So they want our business, they want it to go right, and you know, they're really prepared for the Reds groups when they show up. And having a leader on the ground, whether one of our staff has actually been to that lodge or not isn't necessarily a guarantee. But our host is going to be there, and they're going to be extremely well versed on the ins and outs of that lodge. They're going to be a mentor for tackle, for knots, for strategy, and all those different things. They're going to be an experienced angler that's going to be able to mentor everybody in the group on some type of strategic discipline for that fishery, so that you get to make the absolute most out of your trip.
Well, I'm super excited for my trips, and I'm excited to hear more about. I think you're going to Chile.
Yeah,
in
I'm
January?
going. It's going to be my first trip to Patagonia, and I've been looking. I've been courting this lodge for about 2 years now, and I'm really excited. So my trip, you know, I heard all about Jurassic Lake, man, yesterday. It sounds amazing. That one's been on my radar. But my dream of going to Chile is I really want to walk the estancias on small creeks and catch brown trout on dry flies in South America. That is like something since I first heard about it as a teenager, I've always wanted to do that.
Well, it's going to be awesome, and I'm playing with fire here because we could get into long discussions about this, which hopefully we'll do again sometime. But you got to get you to the Sportsman Show. Thanks for coming on and talking to some weirdo at the Sportsman Show and trusting that you're not going to go into a place where you're going to get.
Dude, I'm so glad to be here. This is awesome. Yeah.
We're all of our social media is still the same.
Yeah, the huntforsuccesspodcast.com, Facebook, Instagram, the website. Obviously, you can look us up on YouTube, the Hunt for Success Podcast.
Go check out Red's Fly Shop. Try to meet Joe Roeder.
The lodge is incredible, too. Cody turned me on to the lodge. Phenomenal.
Bring your family.
It's amazing.
And get out there and fish. And it's been really fun being able to talk about success and business practices and personal development around one of my favorite things, which is fishing. So
Cool. We'll do this again, guys.
all right.
Hey,
See you next time.
thank you, guys.